Okay, Child Development 22205, book walkthrough on Chapter 10, Emotional Behavior Disorders. This one's going to be a quick one. It's interesting because there's a lot here. So out of all of the chapters, if you've seen, after Unit 1, when we talk about the foundations, and then we get into speech and language and learning disabilities, and then we talked about ADHD, and then autism, and then even ID. Now we're back on track number wise ish. Next chapter is 15. But emotional behavior disorders is interesting because this is the chapter where people are the most nervous. I don't know how to say that nicely, but I like how they talk about Demi Lovato. She's had a lot of issues up and down and sideways. And now I think, currently she's kind of exploring herself and figuring out if she's, non-binary or whatever. Guess what? That's normal for your 20s. People are still figuring it out. I know a lot of people still figuring it out in their 40s. And so, she's not doing wrong. She's doing the best that she can. And so, and she talks about being bullied, but at the same time, I think we've all been bullied. So if you just take a 10,000 foot view of emotional behavior disorders, remember, doctors will say stuff like a mood disorder, like depression or bipolar disorder, or they'll say a thought disorder like schizophrenia. In the educational community, like under IDEA, we say emotional and behavior disorders. Now, my son has this as his third category on his IEP, and I took their recommendation to the doctors, and I go, what do you think about this? And she goes, I don't think about emotional behavior disorders because that's an educational term. That's not a medical term. I was like, thank you. So again, until the doctor agrees that there are some other behavior, emotional behavior things, then it's really just a school thing. And so it does sound kind of like a bad thing, but it's not. I tell people, listen, if your child just get EBD as one of their categories, that just means they get more services. Who could use more services? Everybody, right? The problem is that how emotions impact our education is very, very, very nebulous. And we've talked about heterogeneousness, how things are different. This is another category that's extremely heterogeneous. Again, one person with depression is not like another person with depression. Another person who has anxiety is not like another person who has anxiety. Another person who has bipolar disorder, which is technically not diagnosed until after 18, or if they have a mood disorder, that they're all different than everybody else with mood disorder. So there's a lot of different definitions, but what we found recently is because of COVID, even before COVID, there was a lot of anxiety, like early childhood anxiety is on the rise. There's a lot more depression. There's a lot more self-harm. Again, through COVID, there was a little spike in suicidality. Children now can say things like self-harm, cutting. You'll hear young kids say, I want to kill myself. They don't exactly know what they mean. But, and then there's also other destructive behaviors like drugs, alcohol. And now we have a big opiate and fentanyl issue here in the United States. And so you're going to see a lot of people who have big emotions, but they don't know how to deal with it. And again, IDEA only wants to deal with it because if it's affecting the child's educational performance, right? If they're great at school and they're depressed at home, they're not going to work on it. Make sense? So let's say it can't be explained by intellectual. So their IQ is fine. Their sensory issues are fine. They don't have autism, and they don't have like seizure disorder or a brain injury, right? So it's an inability to learn. It's really has a lot to do with moods, emotions, and affect. So an inability to build or maintain interpersonal relationships. Look, that sounds like autism, right? Ooh, but it can't be autism because we said we took that out and we took that out, right? Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. So again, as a teenager, we all go through the awkward phase, or like, who am I? Or nobody likes me, or I hate everybody. But some of that's normal. But if it's so extreme, then we would say inappropriate types of behavior or feelings. Now, normal circumstances is public school, right? If you have an intact family and everybody's getting along, but you're the one who's like depressed all the time, it seems a little bit out of balance. But if your parents are going through divorce and your dad's an alcoholic and all those things, and you're having a hard time keeping your emotions balanced, that is normal, right? So those would be considered appropriate behavior given the circumstances. General pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. I was a very angry teenager. I had a really weird living situation. My parents were weird. But I wouldn't say it was depression. It was just generalized anger. And I did a lot of self-damaging behaviors. It was the 80s. I was a smoker. I did all kinds of funky stuff that was like, well, I don't really care about myself, so I'm just going to do whatever. And if I get hurt or injured or killed, that's fine. Very passively, like, yeah, I'm a lot different than I was then, but that's how I know things get better, right? But again, check this out. Physical symptoms related to fears. Oh, my stomach hurt, my head hurts, there is proof that depression does cause pain, because the same things that happen in our neurotransmitters, our brains kind of carve out, and then they do cause body pain. But again, that usually happens in older people. Now we rule out schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is extremely rare. It's like 0.02 of the population, even for adults. And I think it's like 0.002 for children. Schizophrenia is very rare for children, but it does show up every once in a while. Again, National Alliance on Mental Illness talks about a feeling or mood. Let's see, CDC says alterations in thinking, mood, or behavior, or a combination that impairs functioning. We've all met people with depression. It might be you, it might be me. But what it is, it's not so much the depression, it's how that person performs in school, right? So emotional disturbance, again, this is a school term. That's actually not very kind, I don't think. We're now using terms like dysregulation disorder, or having trouble regulating, right? Or having big feelings, or right, or getting out of control, things like that. So it has to affect the educational performance for it to be included in the IEP. Let's see. It has to have 3 behaviors: bullies, threatens, intimidates. See, this is my kid's doesn't. He doesn't initiate physical fights, but look at this one right here is for, conduct disorder. Yeah, this is a big one. Conduct disorder is headed to juvie. Conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder is heading to juvie. Now, these are not school terms. These are DSM-5 terms, which is the medical term. So if you hear conduct disorder from a doctor, that makes sense, but then it would come over to the school and be called emotional behavior disorder. So this is a big one. Bullies, fights, uses weapons, cruel to animals, steals without confrontation, with confrontation, forces sexual activity, sets fire, deliberately destroys property, breaks into houses or buildings, lies to it, stays out all night, runs away from home, commits truancy. Those are big ones. My kid doesn't do any of that, thank God. But again, these are the proofs right here. Like, these are the things that happened with that kid. It has to be at least 3 recurring criteria. And then he did 10 instances of truancy. And then, does it affect school? Of course, if he's not in school, it's going to affect school. And then he's fighting with friends, or maybe stealing stuff from the neighbors and stuff like that. So we look at EBD as externalizing behaviors such as aggression. Sometimes you'll get it with hyperactivity and impulsivity that comes with ADHD that happens. But is it really ADHD at that point, or is it emotional behavior disorder? It kind of depends. It's like a 6 of one or half dozen over the other. Non-compliance is not following the rules, and delinquency means skipping school or acting in illegal acts. Now, some of the internalizing behaviors are harder to find, because you'll see that people don't share their issues. Like when a kid's fighting, you can see something's going on, right? But when a kid's not doing anything, that's hard. So internalizing behaviors like eating disorders, or anxiety and depression, or cutting, self-harm, pulling hairs out. I've seen students pull their hair out, cut. I met with a student who had all the cuts on her arm by hair. And it's like, how long has she been doing that one? Hold on. Let me see my girlfriend. I gotta color. Okay, sorry. So again, externalizing behavior, sometimes, when you have a kid who's like beating up other kids, or bullying other kids, or tagging the bathroom, Boys show depression outwardly, girls show depression inwardly, but we are seeing an increase in eating disorders in boys now. Ugh, it's interesting. Now, also, what about this whole like gender fluidity thing? That's got to be another way that kids are depressed, right? Again, you could have a kid with a typical IQ, typically developmental milestones, was totally fine. And then guess what? Puberty kicks in and they're all a mess. Hormones could do a lot to us, right? And you'll see this depression in preschoolers. Yes. Anger, trouble sleeping, eating problems, separation. Yes. In preschoolers, that's 3 to 5. 6 to 8 frequent accidents. And I don't just mean in their pants. Just their bodies awkward. They might be awkward with other people. They're dropping things. They're just kind of like disorganized, attention-seeking behaviors, school problems. This is first, second, third grade. Heartbreaking, right? 9 to 12, low self-esteem. Lethargy just means low energy. Self-destructive behavior, suicidal thoughts. Yes, you can have third graders with suicidal thoughts. It's hard, right? Then teenagers changing the eating or sleeping patterns, low energy, apathy, withdrawal, physical complaints, headache. This sounds like teenager in a shoebox. Difficulty concentrating, rebelliousness, substance abuse, preoccupation with death. The problem is some of these things are very normal for teenagerness. But if these are changes, so again, if you're like very involved in your child's life, you'll see these changes. And so then when things change, then you're like, hey, what's going on? And sometimes they're running with the wrong crowd, or somebody dared them to take a drug, or they had a secret relationship and they broke up. So it could be any of those things. You just have to stay in contact with those children. You have to be kind of the annoying, like, best friend, but like, still be a parent. If you're like not a parent, but you can still monitor kids, like you're an auntie or a sibling, those are the best. Now, ODD is one of the biggest ones. Again, this is a DSM-5. This is a medical thing. This would fall under, at school, emotional behavior disorders. ODD is juvenile hall. ODD is the under 18 version of sociopathology. So in order to be called a sociopath or a psychopath, clinically, to be diagnosed with that, ODD has to be present before the age of 18. It's oppositional defiant disorder. And 95% of the kids in juvenile hall have ODD. And so sometimes they want to be oppositional. They've learned in their culture to be oppositional. Sometimes there's a chemical disorder where they just, so look at the symptoms. Loses temper, easily annoyed, is angry or resentful, argues with authority figure. Man, that sounds like me as a teenager. Yikes. Yeah, that was me as a teenager right there. Refuses to comply with requests or rules. I did comply with the rest of deliberately annoys others. I've seen that in kids. They see what will piss you off and they do it. Blames others. Oh, this is my kid. Displays spiteful or vindictiveness. Oh, no, he's not like that. So there's the story over here, but it tells you must be persistent in and actions with more than one person. So if they do it at home and they do it at school, yeah, that's more than one person. Inconsistent with expected and characteristic for their age. Sometimes they're like super aggressive when they're like 5, and then all of a sudden, like, you're like, why is this happening? And then you trace it back to where they got molested or their parents are splitting up or something like that. So things like, does it create other problems? You bet. So social anxiety is another one that's, again, a DSM thing. But at the same time, this is getting a lot more common. Fears of humiliation and embarrassment, or what would people think of me, or what would people, would they reject me? Like, again, they might have big behaviors, big emotions. Things like that. Anxiety is just dealing with other people can really throw people off. I have a friend of mine who is practically agoraphobic, and she'll go out in certain situations, but she has to really psych herself up, and then she has to decompress for a couple of days. And so she's just anxious that she's not going to act like other people, or people are going to look at her weird, or, I mean, this is a grown woman. And so she doesn't work. She's just an at-home mom, which is great. That's good for her life. And she just gardens and cooks like every day. Like, I couldn't do it, but it works for her, right? And so she's like, if I'm feeling anxious, I won't go. But if I can psych myself up, then I'm good. Yeah, it's interesting. So again, here's the externalizing behaviors versus the internalizing behaviors. You'll see these things. You guys know what these are. But look at these things like unfounded fears or phobias. My son, he's scared of pool drains, but he's never had an accident. He's never been sucked down by a pool drain and this and that. And so there's stuff like that where I have to be like, well, buddy, it's never happened to you, so why are you scared? And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be scared. We just kind of walk through it. And so I do tell him, yeah, drains can suck you down. They can, but you're bigger than the drain, dude. You're 200 pounds. So we have to like do systematic like exposure and desensitization and things like that. So kids who are anxious and have that internalizing behaviors are usually worried, they have panics. Sometimes, again, there's the hair pulling, cutting, they stop eating or they overeat or they work out too much or things like that. Like this, and over here, this externalizing behaviors is everything that would just be on the outside, like obscene gestures. It could be like exposing themselves. They could threaten physical harm. My kid threatened a teacher, I'm going to sue you. I was like, oh, geez. I was like, ugh. So you'll see the difference between internalized and externalizing behaviors, but the problem is they're both the same in terms of red flags. If you see those things, something's going on. Now EBD is pretty low, very low. It's 6%. In terms of like blue, it's about the same as intellectual disabilities. But I think that number is getting bigger because of COVID. We were all isolated, right? We all have like these weird feelings like, do I like people? Do I not like people? Do I want to go back to work? Do I not want to go back to work? Do I want to go to school? Do I not want to go to school? I think we're kind of like dealing with this. And sometimes they have to take kids out of school because, they got suspended or expelled. And then it's like, they have to decide this is called a determination manifestation. If they have been, if this child was like diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then at school they have an IEP for EBD, and then they had a big behavior at school and then they get kicked out. We're like, wait a minute, we already identified this kid has these issues. They're on an IEP. Guess what? This disability showed up in big behaviors. That means they didn't support the IEP properly. It's not the child's fault to act the way the child acts. We're asking a child, let's say a 10-year-old, to act better than they should, even though they have this diagnosis in this category. We're the adults. Typically, a developed adult should be able to handle or manage a child who has less skills, been on the planet for less time, and has a diagnosable and categorical disorder. So this manifestation determination, basically, it's usually the team doing a poor job. And then if there was a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, they might have to modify that. But again, so my son was suspended 5 times in the 2nd grade. 4 were on a full moon, but that really doesn't make a big difference. But I'm like, that's an 80% statistical significance. But anyways, and so they'd be like, well, he can't be in school because he's a danger. I said, well, we've already just established that he is dysregulated. He has autism, he has ADHD, he's impulsive. Like, so you're saying if he had a broken leg and we let him be in a wheelchair for 2 months, he would be in trouble if he didn't run. He didn't run at PE. So we've agreed what his disorders are. We know what those disorders include. We know that there's going to be big behaviors, but when he has big behaviors, you kick him out. I think that is opposite of what the IEP says. And I think that's opposite to what the federal government wants. And guess what? You guys didn't do your job. So let's revamp the BIP, or let's revamp the IEP. You guys need us. And then finally they said, well, we can't service him here. He needs more support. I was like, well, yeah, he needs more support. But what they did is they suggested to go into an SDC classroom, which is called a special day class. And that's class is called it. It's like a half and half class. But there, all they did was work on behaviors and they stopped doing academics. And so that's why we ended up at another school, because I was like, wait a minute, he can have behaviors and work on academics. So basically he was the kid who was like, oh, I don't have to do homework if I have a big behavior. I mean, Yeah, don't ever think kids with autism are dumb, because they're not. And he would flat out say it. Well, I just realized if I just made a big enough behavior and everybody was like really concerned, I would probably just get my devices back. I was like, oh hell. I'm telling you, right? So again, there's a lot of things that can be done with kids of this in this category. It's more sensitive and people are really uncomfortable. But I like this thing here: skill deficits, performance deficits, and fluency problems. This is great. Read through the social skill scenario because it tells you what, let's say for me, like I'm not going to go run and play. I'll be like, hey, yeah, I want to join a softball team. I mean, I could do it, but I can't really do it. You know what I'm saying? So if somebody said, well, you're going to get in trouble if you don't join our softball team, I have a skill deficit, right? Or how about I can do softball, but today, like I have a hurt arm, so I won't do it. I'm not going to perform that day. And fluency problems is like, well, I can play softball. I can play it today, but I am not really good at it. I haven't had enough practice. Now think of that in terms of school. Math, I can't do it. I don't feel like doing it because my head hurts. I haven't had enough practice. Social skills. Well, I can't really make friends. Well, because I don't feel like making friends because I always get bullied, or I haven't had enough practice to make friends. Yeah. So I love this way to look at this now: a skill deficit, a performance deficit, or a fluency problem. And again, like for me, like here's another thing, like I'm not great with a sewing machine. Like I could sculpt, I've done roofing, I've done plumbing, I've done flooring, I've done like weird kinds of arts and things like that. But I'm not a great sewing machine person. I have a very poor skills with sewing machine. Don't know all the pieces and how it works and all that stuff. But I will hand stitch something, so I'll perform without a machine. But fluency, yeah, I need more practice. Same thing with my ukulele. Like I was like, oh, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it because I don't know how, and I haven't had enough practice. But now that I've had the practice, I can do it. And now I have like 3 ukuleles, and I'm considering another. Maybe I should go back to the guitar. So again, give kids some practice examples. Again, social skills deficits, they can affect the playground, and then it can move back into the classroom or any sort of like weekend stuff. Even in my son's school, they want them to do weekend stuff with other kids. Again, we have general characteristics here: withdrawal, depression, anxiety, aggression, non-compliance, and delinquency. But the challenge here is like they may have lower social skills. And if they have lower social skills, are they really going to practice? Personal relationships, that's hard too. Those take practice too. Academic performance takes practice too. But if you don't feel like doing it, or you're having big behaviors, you're not going to do it. And juvenile delinquency, we talked about ODD and conduct disorder. Now it's about the time that we would normally wrap up. So if you need to click off, that's not a problem. I'm just going to keep going and post the recording. Okay. So I just want to make sure that I cover all the pieces here. So now we talked about prior in unit 1 about PBIS, those positive behavior interventions and supports. Usually kids with EBD have been through all the supports, and then they get that referral for the IEP. This wraparound supports, this is what I have in my house. And this is what happens is that some school districts, they employ people to go to the homes, and but then, or they contract with another agency. So our district contracts with another agency to provide wraparound support. So that in wraparound includes 24-hour emergency line, parent support, ABA, and like clinical therapy. And so again, it's interesting because they offered it a few years ago, and my husband was like, no. And I was like, yeah, we need it. Yeah, we need it. I always say, take all the services that you can get, because then unlike later, they're going to say, oh, well, they were refusing services. So I always do that. Let's bring it all in. And so now I actually have RAP services. They actually go to his school so they can see if he's acting a certain way at home versus a certain way at school. And again, it's the same. Because sometimes you'll hear that. Well, parents will say he's a perfect angel at home, and then he goes to school and he's a terror. Or he's a perfect angel at school, when he comes home and he's a nightmare. Well, what's going on at either place that it makes? So my son's consistent. I have to give him that. Again, social skills are huge. I think we all have a little bit of a deficit because of COVID. But early instruction is important. Again, early intervention is the key. Social skills instruction should happen within a generalized education, meaning group work, right? Talking to people, learning about people, learning how to converse with people, learning how to work with people. It's huge. We all need that as adults, right? Training for teachers and parents, using positive discipline, or using peer supports. So again, sometimes using peer supports like an older peer, a mentor type situation. So again, here, some of the solutions include social skills training, PBIS, mental health services. So let's see, my son has social skills at school. The PBIS got him to that school. Mental health services he gets. Academic interventions, yes, at his school. Medical interventions, he's on medications. Wraparound supports, we have that at home. So yeah, this is why I say, I used to be mad and be like, he doesn't have an emotional behavior disorder. Well, guess what? He has all the characteristics, all the challenges, and we're using all the solutions, and he still has big behaviors. So it's not about mom pride, right? It's about doing what's best for the child. And so, again, some of the accommodations and modifications usually give the student options, small group instruction, maybe mentorship, maybe one-on-one instruction, maybe preferential treatment, extended time. These all look the same. Maybe for like every chapter, it's like separate room, reduced noise or distraction, preferential seating, brief assignments, more breaks, sometimes giving them motivators. Motivators is not really the educational piece, but it's more of a personal piece. It's like, so what are you working towards? And let's do X, Y, and Z. So you could, so now at my house, we used to do money for grades at report card time. Now we need money for grades every week. An A is $1, B is 50 cents, that kind of stuff. And so now he wants like his money every week. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then we have like incentives like that for behavior too. So it's like they have a score at school, like 2 is like the normal day, 1 is low, 0 is unacceptable. There's usually a big deal at 0. But then if he gets a 3, so at 2s, he doesn't get money. But if he gets a 3, we give him $5. But if he gets a 1, he pays us. If he gets a 0, he pays us. So we made a 0 point, and then we pay him, and then he pays us. Yeah. So there's things now that he's like, oh, well, I don't want to lose money. I'd rather gain money. And, quite frankly, it's not like we want to reward somebody for just having a normal day. That's why we don't pay money for the 2s. But at the same time, if you want to go over and above, it's not like what happens at work. You can get a bonus. You can get overtime, things like that. So he gets to make his choices. He thinks he's grown. Let's treat him like he's grown, right? Early intervention, again, get in there, get to know the kid, ask questions, get support. I have a friend who's a therapist now at an elementary school, and she's like, these kids, they're having a hard time, right? If you don't get in there early, then you're just setting them up for failure, right? I'm telling you, I've been in and out of therapy my whole life, and I think that's really helped, because I don't even know where I would be if I didn't have somebody I could talk to every other week. Some early warning signs of emotional and behavior disturbances, anxiety in young children. Hyperactivity looks like ADHD, but sometimes they're just dysregulated. Frequent nightmares, stress aggression, is disobedient, has frequent temper tantrums. Again, some of that's normal when the kids are young and dysregulated. But if they're having temper tantrums at 6, 7, 8, not good. Again, internalizing behaviors, hard to find. Sometimes it's hiding. Externalizing behaviors, it's like that squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And so again, having teachers that they connect with, having adults that connect with, seeing a doctor regularly, seeing a therapist regularly, being in different environments, like maybe go to your church group on Sunday, maybe go to a mentoring program, or put them in scouts. It gets them a way to see how other kids act. And sometimes they can't help themselves and they still act. They have big behaviors. I mean, Peyton was in scouts, but we had to take him out. He couldn't, like, if he got dysregulated, he couldn't pull it back in to participate. And they were so nice about it, but he just wasn't ready. He could probably do it now, but at 15, he doesn't want to. Things like that. But what can educators do to increase positive behavior while reducing problem behaviors? There's a lot of different things. And the number one thing I want you guys to remember is positive. You don't humiliate a child. You don't say, well, Johnny did it wrong. You say, I appreciate everybody who paid attention to the rules and followed the rules. So for those of you who have questions about that, come to me and I'll help you. I want you to be successful. So let me help you with that kind of thing. And if you notice, those are the kind of the announcements I give. I do global prompts. I say like, I know some of you are behind, but just remember you can do X, Y, and Z to get caught up. And I'm not singling out anybody. And so it's the same rules. Positive behavior has to be the same for everybody. I don't say, oh, well, because so-and-so is getting a bad grade, I'm going to talk to them nasty. No, right? Again, most of the students get this primary prevention, then it moves to secondary and then to tertiary. Again, letting kids have opportunities to respond and giving specific praise. Use their kids' names and say, I appreciate your input, Sarah. That was a really good suggestion. Or I always like, if somebody makes a suggestion at the beginning of class, I always try to bring it through, like, just like Sarah said at the beginning, let's think about it that way, you know? So, and then the next day it's somebody else. Don't always pick on somebody the same. There's also apps that you can put all your students' names in, and then you like spin the wheel. And once you've called on them, you don't have to call on them again. What? It's really cool. There's some good stuff. So opportunities to respond. I do remember my godson, he has ADHD and attentive type, and the teacher would never call on him. Never, ever, 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 ever call on him. And that came up in the IEP. It's like, why do you never call him? She's like, well, he could get it wrong. She's like, but you have to give him the chance to get it wrong like everybody else. She's like, but he gets it wrong like every time. She's like, but if you don't call on him, you're singling him out. So it's like, yeah, it's really kind of interesting. So here's things like this, positive. I like the way you got started on your seat work right away. Yeah, the good job is bleh. Hey, I noticed that you helped your friend when they dropped their backpack. That was really nice of you. Be specific. Because you want someone to call you say good job to you. Are you a dog? I'm not a dog. Right? And so again, teacher rates of praise are associated with following directions: academic engagement, on-task behavior, compliance. And then higher rates of opportunities to respond are associated with academic outcomes and student engagement. Yeah. So the good behavior game is sometimes you could read up on that, but it's like you give them some rules, and whoever gets caught having good behavior, right? Good behavior. You don't like take marbles out of a jar for bad behavior. Just give the stickers or marbles to the good behavior. We had those in like second grade. And looking, you have somebody taking a score, not the teacher either. So it's really kind of fun, because if you look at it there, look at even better. Longitudinal research has shown that students who played the good behavior game in elementary school exhibit as young adults significant lower rates of drug and alcohol abuse, delinquency, and incarceration for violent crimes. It means you're kind of training them to look for the good and act well. So again, there's more here on pbis.org. And then again, some other links there too. But you can also do a check-in, check-out for social skills and say like the beginning of the day, you could set your agenda for the day. So what do you want to get done today? And then what are 3 things that are your goals that you're working on? Like, saying kind words to friends, or following the rules, or raising my hand during class. Like, you get them to set their own guidelines based on the IEP and whatnot. And then you get them to monitor themselves. I think we're going to start doing that next year with him at 16. I have a feeling he's going to say that you're doing awesome every time, but he'll do a morning check-in. He'll do a class check-in. Like, how would you rate yourself kind of situation. And then we do get structured teacher feedback every day from his one-on-one aide. And then at the end, they get to check out when their card is complete. And then they send us the home communication. So again, we're almost doing that already. We're doing most of that, but he needs to just be a part of that. And it's usually this EBD, they can be more involved as they get older. But again, in the IEP, it's about age of 16 in California. But again, you can have small groups do this and say like, okay, what are we going to focus on? Or how did you, it even happens in my Duolingo app. It says, pick a friend who you want to do this competition with. And I picked my friend, and it didn't say Susie is not doing the competition. I mean, she kind of didn't do it, but I mean, it was just me inviting her, and it said like you had to get like 8 perfect scores. And usually it would be like 4 with you and 4 with your friend, but I got all 8, which is not a big deal. We both got the reward. So it's like, it's kind of thing. So younger kids are going to say stuff like, well, you didn't do your part. And it's just a way for them to keep each other accountable, which is lovely. You know what? Maybe I'll put in that accountability video. Oh, I've just found a new accountability video on YouTube. It's so good. So FBA, we talked about that in developing the IEP. They're figuring out what their behavior is. And sometimes my son, he will have big behaviors when he's trying to get out of stuff, right? And sometimes I have big behaviors because he's confused or whatever, things happen. And so we have to look at what is that behavior trying to get him, right? So FBAs, you can talk more about that. We talked about that in chapter 4, I believe. Let's see. PBIS outcomes. Over 9,000 schools are implementing. I think it's way more now than that. They include reduced discipline, vandalism, delinquency, tobacco, alcohol, and drug use, problems in like the other things like playgrounds, hallways, and buses. So it's a good thing. Like, again, punishing somebody or use negative words and attitude doesn't help. You know, and sometimes the positive stuff, it doesn't always help either, but giving a choice over positive or negative, always keep it, you know, they go low, we go high, right? Always keep it higher. Sadly, the rates of college after when kids have EBD, it's low. The outcomes for these look at this longitudinal data shows up to 2/3 of youth with EBD, many of them a history of delinquency, starts again, eventually have some involvement with the criminal justice. So 65%, 66% have some involvement with the criminal justice system. That's what makes me scared as a mom. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's going to be mouthing off to a cop. He's going to get incarcerated. So I'm like, oh God, please follow the rules. Stop arguing. Like, he hasn't gotten suspended in a while. So that's kind of nice. And then, yeah, so that's good. But how can we improve their long-term outcomes? A lot of social skills, therapy, gen ed, yeah, give them job experiences. In the module, I talk about there is a full documentary about a young girl in like Pennsylvania, and she has emotional stuff, and she's just trying to graduate high school. So yeah, she's a 19-year-old senior, and she has a job, she has a boyfriend, she's a cheerleader, but she's on medication and it's making her not eat. And so they think that she has it's interesting. There's a lot going on with her. It's a really good one because it's kind of sad, but at the same time, you're like, okay, she's making something out of herself. It's really kind of cool. You just have to see what works for them. A lot of times it's career activities. Again, my son wants to work on cars or he wants to work on Disneyland. It's like, we got to get you supported in there. So here's a transition NTACT website, and it's really cool. Again, having emotion stuff, but then going to college and trying to be independent, very, very hard. And so again, this is the part of the chapter that talks about the history. We used to just throw people away and lock the key. Yep. They just used to literally put them in a hospital in a dark room. Yeah, it's just super sad. And if you look in, I think chapter 1, 2, or 3, I have, they used to call this Bedlam. And we had here Willowbrook. So I put in videos of Willowbrook. It's just heartbreaking. We just didn't treat people nicely. We just literally wanted to lock them up and throw away the key. But in the 70s, we disinstitutionalized here. And so a lot of times we still don't know what to do with certain people. They end up becoming homeless because they're emotionally unstable, and it's heartbreaking. Again, we don't ever use physical restraint or mechanical restraints for students ever. Those are illegal. We don't do corporal punishment in public schools. That is illegal. Especially in the state of California, you can't even have like a residential facility here in the state of California. So if I was to send Peyton to a residential facility, it would be out of state because we don't believe in restraints and things like that. So seclusion is illegal too. I got the school district on that too. It was not okay. You can read more about that. Let's see. Yeah, and then again, we weren't treating students well like this. We didn't even educate students like this. And then they put in on the PBIS framework in the late 80s. And so the time for positive action is now. I mean, since we're all sort of suffering from like mental instability just a little bit, even because of COVID, I mean, think if we didn't have COVID, what would our society look like, you know? But again, if you look at more positive stories, Carrie Fisher, she's very vocal about her mental health issues, ended up dying from an aneurysm off of taking a plane ride a couple years ago. It's Princess Leia. But again, you're going to see other people like Demi Lovato, a lot of here's Kelsey. This is the documentary. She's fantastic. She's just so honest and real. And it's really cool. I've had a really crappy life, and a little bit of caring will take me a long, long way. Yeah. She's cool. I put that in the module. Watch that if you can. If you want to watch any sort of documentary that applies to this class, you can watch it and give me a 2-page reflection, and I give extra credit. So feel like you need it. In fact, after this class, I'm going to a conference on mental health at the county. And so it's just ironic that, last December, one of the results came out, a study came out that said over 55% of college students have a diagnosable mental illness. So we're trying to really connect with that community and make sure that, that we can support our students who may be facing some of these similar things. Even if you didn't have an IEP, there's issues that we can support you with. Technology and prevention, yes, there's always technology and prevention. Having more people get supports. Look at this. It says African American youths are 3 times more likely than white or Asian Pacific Islander students to be suspended. Are 3 times more likely than students from other groups to be arrested. Are 2 to 4 times more likely to end up in residential placements. Represent 17% of the youth population, but make up 60% of youth prosecuted in adult court. So did you know that the United States is only about 15 to 17% Black or African American? So why is there 62% of them prosecuted in adult court, right? It should be 17 and 17. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. So again, look at this. It says right here, ironically, the average yearly expenditure to incarcerate one youth in the United States is about $150,000, which is more than 13 times greater than the average pupil per expenditure. Educate them well, they won't be incarcerated. How about get in there, care about them, learn about who they are. Are we over identifying students with EBD? Nah, not really. But in a lot of students who do have EBT are not receiving appropriate services. A lot of times parents don't know because they have EBD as well. The definition is funky. A lot of people are embarrassed. People are uncomfortable. People don't want to talk about emotions. And it's just like at the same time, there's help out there, but there's that stigma of mental health and where people say they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to listen to it. They don't want to swear. They just say, suck it up, walk it off. When I was a kid, I was fine. But at the same time, that's not how it works. Our society is totally different. Can we use technology to help EBD? Absolutely. We have therapy online. We have texting for suicide hotlines. I've actually been through the text just to see what it's like. And it's really cool. And people are so nice and friendly on there too. So mental health benefits, this free app called NAMI Air Breathing. It's helping you have therapeutic breathing. There's also things like the iWatch that'll tell you if your anxiety's up, your sleep's down, your this kind of situation. So there's a lot of different pieces of technology that we can use to kind of help people have stable emotional experiences. But just know that this category is a challenge. This is a very big challenge. But if it's on your kids or it's on one of the students in your classroom, it's not bad. It just gives more services. And isn't more services the solution to these bigger nebulous problems? Yes. So again, just remember, you can have somebody looking over here at the chapter. You can have somebody with EBD who also has ASD, who also could have a speech issue. Somebody with emotional issues could also be deaf and hard of hearing. Low vision and blindness can overlap on those. There's a lot. So just know that students that have EBD oftentimes have other things going on too. And if not, it's definitely looking like it affects their schooling. So this is the one that is a challenge. But if you look here and I put 7, 8, 10 and 15 together, yeah, there are students who can have all of those things at once. So just keep in mind, that's why I put those chapters out of order. But at the same time, it's because you'll see those things overlap. There's a lot. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording and take questions.